Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Hey everyone, welcome to 5 to Thrive Live. I'm Dr. Lise and I'm here with my co-host. I'm actually here with my co-host and good friend, Karolyn Gazelle. How are you, Karolyn?
Hey, Lise, I am doing great. I'm not gonna rub it in, but I guess I am gonna rub it in. I am really enjoying retirement. I'm having a good time, Lise.
Oh, fine.
But I will say I'm a little nervous.
Why are you nervous?
Well, because you are going to interview me tonight, and I'm not used to that. I'm used to being the one asking the questions, not answering them. So I'm a little intimidated by that.
Well, I'm not nervous at all. I think you are going to be amazing, and I'm really happy to be interviewing you because I was so excited when you told me that you were going to become a certified grief educator. And I thought, wow, we definitely have to do a deep dive with this. And you need to share some of your recent learnings and talk to people about why this is so important. And you know what? Here you are in retirement, and yet you're back in there studying grief. That's an interesting thing to do. So I just want to hear all about it. But you know what? Before we dive in, Karolyn, can you thank our sponsors?
Oh, I would love to. Okay, beginning with Cetria, a patented form of glutathione clinically proven to raise blood glutathione levels. Glutathione is the master antioxidant and the body's primary defense against free radicals. It also helps support respiratory health. For more information, visit cetriaglutathione.com. Also, ProThrivers Wellness Brain, a product specifically for thrivers that contains cognizant for memory, focus, and attention, as well as other brain-supporting nutrients and herbs. You can find ProThrivers Wellness Brain online at pureformulas.com. There's also ProThrivers Wellness Sleep, which combines higher dose melatonin and other sleep-supporting natural ingredients specifically designed for thrivers. You can find ProThrivers Wellness Sleep at pureformulas.com. And finally, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics. It's a best-selling probiotic for more than 30 years, and it contains 12 probiotic strains that are shelf stable, so no refrigeration is required because of a unique 3-year fermentation process. It's a very effective probiotic. Learn more at drohhiraprobiotics.com. Okay, Lise, where would you like to start?
Okay, well, I think first we need to hear a little bit more about this grief educator certification program that you did. And also, maybe you could talk a little bit about why you wanted to do this after you, as you so aptly said, started to happily enjoy retirement.
You are not the first person who's asked me this question. But first, let me tell you a little bit about the program. So it was a 3-month commitment, and each week there was a lecture led by David Kessler. You know, David Kessler is amazing. He's a world-renowned grief expert, and he's an author. And he was mentored by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I learned about Dr. Kubler-Ross in high school. I did a paper on her. So in addition to that weekly lecture, David would also lead the weekly lab. And then there was a guest speaker each week, and there were also bonus videos. So it was a lot of content. And you know me, Lise, I love content. So it was great in that sense. So why did I want to do this in retirement? Well, first of all, I had the time, but I wanted to get this certification to further my own understanding of death, dying, loss, and grieving. I've personally experienced a lot of loss starting at a very young age, and I've had a lot of loss throughout my life, including recently over the last few years. But in addition to having the information educate me about my grief journey, I have always wanted to incorporate grief work in my volunteer efforts. So I experienced some of this when I was running an equine assisted psychotherapy program in Boulder, Colorado. And that was some of the most rewarding work that I've done in my life. So we had a program that we collaborated with hospice, where we had young kids who had a primary loss come to the ranch and work with the horses to help them heal from their loss. So it was really amazing to me. So now I not only have connections to horses, but I also volunteer at a mini donkey ranch. Very cool. Lise, I brought you there. I
Mhm.
know the mini donkeys are amazing. I'm also training my golden retriever puppy to potentially become certified so we can go into hospitals or schools. So my entire focus is on working with animals, nature, and kids who are grieving a primary loss, like a parent, sibling, or grandparent. I'm so fascinated by the combination of nature and animals and healing, because I've experienced how animals and nature have healed me. Both as a child growing up around animals and being in nature all the time, and as an adult. So it's a passion project for me.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And it sounds actually, I mean, this is a weird thing to say because grief is anything but exciting, but it sounds kind of exciting, to be honest, the way that you're combining such healing forces to fundamentally assist these kids who are struggling with really things that are feelings and situations that are hard for them to grasp and to understand. So I think sounds like a beautiful thing that you've embarked upon.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering if you could share two things, sort of what some of the most surprising aspects of about grief that you've learned in your grief training, because you've been not far from this topic throughout your career, so it's not
Mhm.
unfamiliar to you. So what surprised you about this? And then also just what personally touched you about this?
Mm. Well, there was a lot that was familiar, great reminders, and there was a lot that was new. And one of the things I liked about David Kessler was that he was really a master at making this complex topic more understandable. So he would have catchphrases to drive home a point. It seems a little cliche, but it really helped. So, for example, one thing that sticks with me is I heard him say several times throughout the 3 month process, you can't heal what you don't feel. And he would also say, grief needs to be witnessed. And I believe that fully. I believe that we as humans, we need to have our lives witnessed and our pain and our joys witnessed. So that really resonated. Unfortunately, as a society, I think we often don't witness our grief, and we encourage people to just move on from it, get over it. But what was really important to me is he explained that when grief isn't witnessed, it gets stuffed and it remains an open wound. And this analogy I felt was brilliant. Um, to hear him describe it so clearly was amazing. He explained that we never really get over our grief or our loss. We rarely move on from it. The loss remains with us forever. The goal is to have our grief witnessed, express our feelings safely, and eventually integrate the pain of our loss, and find meaning after the loss, which seems weird, but it's so important. So this wound becomes a scar that we always have with us. Um, but if we have an open wound, we can live with a scar. But if we have an open wound and we keep reopening that wound, that's when grief and grieving gets especially challenging. So the bottom line is we work to heal the wound, but the scar is with us forever. So that stuck with me. Another thing that stuck with me are secondary losses. And I had not thought about this at all. But there are so many secondary losses that come with grief. So we learned about traumatic grief, like losing a child, losing a spouse, having a loved one with dementia, losing somebody to suicide or addiction. So all of these losses are traumatic, but they also come with so many other secondary losses, like who am I going to vacation with? I'm not going to see my child marry. With dementia, I'm losing connection and communication with my loved one. So all of these secondary losses need to be grieved as well as the primary loss. So that was really important. And finally, this was really surprising to me, Lise. He explained that grief and grieving comes with so much judgment. He explained that everyone seems to have an opinion, and so many people are
Mhm.
quick to give that opinion, right? We were told often that it is not our role as grief educators to give advice. Giving advice is judging. For example, a family member may say, well, it's been a year, it's time for you to move on. That's judgment. So we meet the grieving individual wherever they are in the process, and we bear witness to their journey. And then we help them talk about their feelings, talk about their loved ones or their loss. And that's something that didn't happen for me throughout my entire lifetime, every time I experienced a loss.
Mm.
And it's really quite surprising how many different types of losses there are. Divorce, miscarriage, loss of a parent, and I mentioned some of the more traumatic one. It doesn't matter the loss.
Mhm.
Each one of those need to be witnessed without judgment. And
Mhm.
that really hit home for me.
Mhm. Yeah, so important. Gosh, I mean, there's plenty of other things we can judge.
Yeah, yeah,
We
for
don't
sure.
need to judge this for
I mean,
sure.
yeah, it's a hard enough time to begin with, and then to feel, and then it's not safe. You need to feel safe if you're going to be processing these very
Mhm.
difficult emotions.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned that David Kessler trained with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I think a lot of people are familiar with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross as a name and associate her with the stages of grief. Like she really basically said, hey, look, there's this thing called grieving, and there's sort of a pattern to it. So she gave permission, I think, for people to grieve in many ways.
Hmm. Hmm.
And she named 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So, if grieving is so individual, as you just indicated, how do these 5 stages, or do these 5 stages still stand, and how do they influence that individualized grieving process?
They do still stand, and I'm so glad that you brought this up because I think Dr. Kubler-Ross's work was horribly misunderstood for a very long time. As a society, we want things neat and tidy and orderly. We like quick fixes. So, in a way, she gave us that quick fix. She's like, oh, you're grieving? Step one, step two, etc. Um, and I think people took it as a formula that everyone follows the same and
Mhm,
boom, 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 you're done. But David explained very clearly that that's not really what she intended. He
mm,
was so close to her. He was at her deathbed. He's
mm,
written several books with her. Their kids played together. I mean, so he knew her very well. And he said, this is not what she intended. Yes, there are 5 stages, but they're not linear. People can move in and out of one stage. They can skip stages. They can experience a stage years after the loss. So it's very fluid. And in fact, in this certification program, we didn't spend much time at all on the stages. We focused more on the individual's journey and meeting them where they are. So often society wants to fix things. And,
mhm,
grief can't be fixed. It can be transformed, it can be integrated, but it can't be fixed. It doesn't need to be fixed. So the key is to try to find hope after a loss, and that's a process. And as you and I both know, it's often a painful process. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to transform that pain into love and honoring the loss or the person. And that's not easy. And
mhm,
it's definitely not a quick fix.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. I mean, that's a very interesting and important perspective, and just reaffirms the individuality of this process and how important it is to honor that. So, what other highlights have there been for you during this grief certification program?
Wow. I mean, there's so many. I hope that you and I can do another show on this topic, because there was just a lot. I really learned a lot from David Kessler, and I felt he was an amazing speaker and an amazing teacher, actually. But I also loved the guest speakers. So I liked the speaker who talked about what we can do physically to help us
Mhm.
heal. And Lisa, that made me think of our I Thrive program and Five to Thrive, because he talked about being out in nature and movement and diet and getting enough sleep. All of these things that we can do self care help us physically go through our grief. But then there was a guest speaker who talked about how grief affects the brain. And here's an interesting little connection, Lise. The speaker who talked about the grieving brain was researcher Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor. I quoted Dr. O'Connor in the article I wrote a year ago for Psychology Today about the harmful effects of unresolved grief. And she was I'm glad I quoted her, but she was even more amazing in person. So, in that lecture, Dr. O'Connor explained that grieving is a form of learning. Just think about that. Like, that kind of takes the sting away just in and of itself,
Mm.
because we learn from our grief. And she emphasized that not everyone learns the same. So, the connection between grief and the brain is all about love and attachment. We hang on to the grief because we have difficulty transforming that attachment, and we get stuck in a cycle. We ruminate. We create narratives that don't serve us. We don't re-engage, et cetera, et cetera. So she says we need to give our brain new data with awareness by making small changes. We can basically, what she says, we can basically rewire our brain so it's not so painful. So, for example, if I reach for the phone to call my loved one who's died,
Mhm.
that can become a painful reminder, or it can become a cue. So in that moment, we can choose to shift gears. It's not easy, I'm telling you that. But
Mhm.
instead of thinking about, oh, I want to talk to my loved one, that fills me with sadness or anger or depression or some other intense feeling, we can maybe use that moment as a cue to pause and think about things differently. Like, oh, I want to call and talk to my loved one
Mhm.
because I appreciated them. I loved them, and they were so special to me.
Mhm.
So that simple pause, according to Dr. O'Connor, can help rewire the brain so the grief becomes less painful. And you and I, Lise, have written about and talked about the power of love, and this is what happens when we rewire that brain. We give the power to love, not pain. We give the power to love, not loss. Love is so much stronger than the loss. And that's what can help us. We can recalibrate. I mean, obviously it gets complicated when the loss is traumatic, like I mentioned, suicide, addiction, or let's say the person who dies was horribly abusive. Those are all very complex losses and traumatic losses. But remember, the goal is to transform our losses into a scar versus a wound that keeps getting reopened. So I think that those are definitely some highlights, and so much of the course was interesting. And I'll just close with one other uh, guest speaker. I really liked Emma Willis. Emma Willis is Bruce Willis's wife. Of course, Bruce Willis has a horrible brain condition right now, and um, she was so authentic in her pain as a caregiver. She talked openly about her anger and how she realized that she said anger is pain's bodyguard. And she said we need to make friends with anger and all of those other intense emotions. So she explained, and here's another great catchphrase that I liked. emotions need motion. So the way we give emotions motion is by recognizing and honoring them, even the tough emotions like anger, guilt, and frustration. We had an entire week on guilt. And I think that these intense emotions are the ones that can be really hard to grapple with. And, and that's what causes us to recoil. And we're going to, oh, wait a minute. I'm feeling angry and my husband is sick. I'm a horrible person, and then we start stuffing things and then we feel anger again and boom, that wound is reopened. So until we really look at the anger and look at all these intense emotions, we're going to keep reopening that wound and it's not going to become a scar and we're not going to be able to live with it. So she was very powerful, and I believe that she did an amazing thing. We also had a whole week on excuse me, how to help grieving children, which, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, is part of my passion. So, Lise, here's a troublesome statistic: 1 in 11 children in the United States will experience a primary loss before age 18. In the state of New Mexico, it's 1 in 7.
Wow.
Here's the other really thing that you and I are so passionate about. These children who have experienced a loss before age 18, as they grow into adulthood, they're at far greater risk of developing anxiety, depression, and addiction. So if in fact we can help these kids process their grief and turn that open wound into a scar that they're able to live with, we can hopefully reduce their risk of having other serious health issues later in life. And I think that's powerful, and I think that that's what it comes down to as a human race. If we process our grief, and if we if we do the work and we look at these feelings, and we feel safe in expressing these feelings. So I have to say, the certification program was very rewarding. I learned a lot, and I'm excited to put it into action with my volunteer work with animals, nature, and kids.
So I was going to ask you to just dive into that a little bit more, like how, and I won't hold you to this, but at this early stage, how do you envision doing that given what you've learned and what just touching on some of the things you've just said?
Well, so, I've had a lot of experience with horses. I have not had a lot of experience with donkeys. Uh, and I looked up, there's actually research showing that donkey therapy can help, which is amazing. But let me give you an example. So, one of the things that is key with grieving and processing your grief is feeling safe. And oftentimes, children in particular don't feel safe to express themselves. They don't express their grief in school because they feel different. They often don't. They kind of go in and out of their grief. One minute they're grieving, and the next minute they're playing, and they kind of puddle jump, is what we call it. So here's a cool thing about donkeys, Lise. Donkeys are innate protectors. Horses are flight animals, not donkeys. Donkeys are put with sheep and goat herds because they will protect that herd no matter what. So imagine if we bring some kids in, we start talking about donkeys, and we start telling them about, hey, the donkey's role in life is to keep other animals safe. And then we have a interaction, and they're grooming the donkeys, and we start talking about what makes you feel safe, and when do you feel safe, in talking about your loved one. And so the interaction with the donkey and having that conversation, all of a sudden this young child is talking about their parent who died, or their sibling who died. And the donkey helps facilitate the conversation and the healing. It's really powerful stuff, and I've seen it firsthand with horses, and I'm excited to see it firsthand with the donkeys. And there are other examples of themes that we can use to help stimulate healing with these grief groups for kids.
Hmm. So I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment. And I imagine that there are some people listening to this very episode at this very minute who are in active grief. And I say active because I think people who have had a significant loss will always carry some grief with them. But as you say, it becomes more scarred over time. But, there are people listening that have a wound of grief occurring. Is there anything that, knowing that people are at different stages and different times and you can't give them, tell them what to do, is there any kind of assurance that you can provide or something that you might distill out of your training that could provide them with some comfort?
Mm. Well, there are lots of resources, first and foremost. And I feel like the first thing I want to say is find your witness or your witness tribe and find a safe place to talk, and don't be afraid to talk and to remember and think about that loved one, because that is probably one of the most challenging things, because oftentimes people are like, well, I don't want to talk about my loved one who died because it's just going to make me sad, or it's just going to make me angry, or it's just going to make me this. I find a way to express yourself and find your way to embrace the love. The grief and the pain that you're feeling is because of the depth of love that you had for that person, or whatever, even if it's a divorce or a pet or whatever. So yeah, find your witness and find the love, and do everything you can to hang on to that, so you can heal that open wound.
Yeah, and I think find the pause too. I love that thing you
Mhm.
started with at the beginning. Just use the pause to remember that whatever feelings of sadness and anger and overwhelm are coming up are because of the feelings of love that you just talked about.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Lise, are you willing to have another show about this? Because I would love to hear. I mean, you, over the years as a physician, you have cared for so many people with challenging illnesses like cancer. You've worked closely with caregivers. I would love to learn from you what you want to share about loss, grief, and the grieving process. We're out of time now, but unless you have just a quickie, but I think we need to do another show. What do you think?
Well, yeah, we can do another show, but and at that time you'll have some donkey stories to tell us, which will be
Yes.
good. But I can just say quickly that, I think in my time of working with people who are, especially people who are dealing with cancer and chronic disease and who lose loved ones or who are losing their own bodily form as we know it, all that kind of grief, I have just been continually so touched by the courage that people bring to the grieving process.
Mhm.
And to your point, it shows up so differently for each person, and each expression of grief is valid for its own reasons. But I think that, people who have a loved one that they're losing to a chronic illness have both a luxury and a curse of having that be a longer process. So they have the luxury of being able to start saying goodbyes and getting used to doing things differently and so forth. But then it's a bit of a curse because they're in grief. They're having both current and anticipatory grief all at once. And so, I just think it takes a lot of courage, and I've just been so impressed with it. And so I think I would say that regardless of where people are, that when grief comes to pay its visits, everybody can count on the fact that they will discover a repository of courage they didn't even know existed.
Excuse me, that's great. All right, Lise. Well, this has been a great show. Thank you for letting me talk about my passion. And I would love to once again thank our sponsors. First, ProThrivers Wellness Sleep and Brain Formulas, Cetria Glutathione, Dr. O'Hara's award-winning probiotic. And remember, you can find past shows at ithriveplan.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Yes, thanks to our sponsors, and thanks for listening. May you, you know what? Before may you can find all of our past show podcasts on ithriveplan.com. And may you experience joy, laughter, and love. It's time to thrive. Have a great night.